the emperor, I think, kind of built in this appreciation of what was happening in the rest of the continent.
For many, many years, he could not trust anybody else. He himself was Minister of Education.
He was really a very special, God-gifted person.
The story of Ethiopia's great monarch, modernizer, and tragic hero Haile Selassie starts in the 1,000-year-old city of Harar. It was here in Harar that Rastafari, as he was known before his coronation as emperor, cut his political teeth. It also serves as a strong symbol of the difference between the ancient but primitive feudal society he grew up in and the modern nation he wanted to build. As a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Harar cannot construct new buildings within the old city's walls. But new buildings do go up outside the old city, and technology creeps in from all directions.
So the coming year is holy war, hopeful, no war, no problems.
Jeff Pierce is a Canadian author who has spent 10 years working on a book about the country's war with Italy. In his decade of research, he has interviewed some of the top experts on Ethiopian history.
Emperor Haile Selassie, of course, he had a special connection to Harar, and he invested in coffee plantations. He was very shrewd financially, but he was also very politically astute.
These were the rules of King Haile Selassie. So these are medals which are gotten from different countries.
Hailu Gasho is a tour guide who has taught himself 4 languages and shows visitors around Haile Selassie's honeymoon palace in Harar.
It's a very young Rasmussen.
Yes, I think. The Haile Selassie's time, actually, I was like too young for that, and my family used to mention that he's one of a good leader. And everything is, the main reason what they mention is everything is very peaceful, and most of the things are very cheap.
They have been brought together by the man, dead almost 4 decades, who tried to bring together his nation, his continent, and the world, often with his own personal touch.
The most unique habit about King Haile Selassie is not only pretending like a king and always staying in the palace. So my grandfather used to tell me that he always go to a place where people get sick, like in the hospitals, and visit people. And people who don't have finance, they're supported by King Haile Selassie. So he's a really nice king, in my opinion.
Rastafari was the son of nobleman Ras Makonnen, a provincial governor. He was also an Ethiopian hero for fighting off invading Italians in the late 1800s. Ras Makonnen is buried in this Harar church in a place of honor. His compatriots who died repelling the Europeans are buried underneath the church. His father decided to educate young Rastafari with tutors of different specialities, one an Ethiopian monk and the other a Mexican surgeon. Ras Makonnen had 2 sons, Upon his death in 1908, his eldest, Yilma, inherited the post. 2 years later, he also passed away, and Rastafari became governor while still a teenager.
If you want to understand the Ethiopian sort of feudal politics, it was really like Game of Thrones. It really was. Imagine this boy who's a duke, and he is given responsibilities to run this province at 14 years old. And he's trained by a Catholic priest. He's not trained by an Orthodox Ethiopian cleric. So already the other nobles are suspicious of this kid.
At 24, he was appointed regent by Empress Zewditu, who used the young man to solidify her own hold on power due to his influential family. This made Rastafari heir to the throne, but he would have to survive some challenges to become emperor.
When there was a rebellion against him, sometime around when he was regent and soon to become emperor, he was a fan of flight. And he got a plane, and they bombed and machine gunned the rebels. So you had these guys with spears and antique rifles and spears and shields coming out, and here's this biplane coming over, bombing you. Well, that ends that.
Eventually, the empress passed on, and it was time for him to take the throne. This moved him from Harar through the Ethiopian countryside to the new capital of Addis Ababa.
At that time, we couldn't assume the buildings. There are huts, different kinds of huts, and a very big house, maybe one commander of the army. The other low-level commanders, they built their huts around his home, around 11,000 people in Addis Ababa. And there is no road, you see. Nobody can assume that. Therefore, when Haile Selassie came to the power, very big buildings were churches.
While Addis was still primitive, the new emperor had big plans and decided to build a world-class palace that would impress Ethiopians and foreign visitors alike.
This palace also it was built after his coronation in 1934. In 1934, with 800 workers and 8 months.
His palace is now part of a museum on the ground of the country's first university, which he himself founded. His visits with students showed the early priority he was putting on modernizing education in Ethiopia.
He used to visit many schools throughout the whole Ethiopia. He was encouraging students to learn. He was even giving us incentives by giving a small amount of money. He used to give us sweater and so on and so forth. So he was encouraging us to learn.
I grew up in sort of in his family's schools. You know, I started with his grandson's school, then his son, Mukonnan, and then went to his another grandson in person. I had the opportunity once or twice to meet him.
Haile Selassie wanted young people who could do more than just read or write, who would become diplomats, scientists, engineers, but he had to start with the basics.
I think I must have been 7 or 8 years old, and we lined up to meet him, and that's the first time I saw him. And he gave us 50 cents each, and I value that money. That's the money I used to buy
the first pencil and the first writing pad.
The young emperor's passion for education would eventually bear fruit, but in the early years it was opposed by the nobility that Rastafari had come from.
Haile Selassie used to give gifts on Christmas Day to the students going to school. In those days, the feudal system and the, well, they call them now reactionaries, but the truly conservative people didn't want their children to be going to school and get contaminated by Western culture. But Haile Selassie was desperate to have educated people for his administration, for his services. And even the children, it is the servants' children that they sent to school. And his first ministers were composed of mostly commoners, not from the nobility.
In order to push forward his agenda for modern education, he needed to win over this nobility, which he did by supporting tradition.
Haile Selassie is a very good diplomat. He was also conservative. He tried to keep the tradition of Ethiopian people and the tradition of the monarchy, to keep his hierarchy. And he tried also to keep the throne.
To unify the country and have everyone support his modern ideas, he would need to earn the loyalty of those from the country's other 80 tribes.
Ethiopia is a federal state. There are 83 ethnic groups who represent 83 ethnic groups. Perhaps King Haile Selassie from 3 ethnic groups, Amhara, Oromo, or Rage or Silde. Therefore, what was the rest? 83 ethnic groups, not easy. 80 ethnic groups, they have their own culture, their tradition, their belief, even their traditional kings, they have it.
Perhaps the most crucial factor that helped him to unify the country and gain acceptance for his modernization program was the support of the powerful Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Upon his coronation, he was renamed Haile Selassie, in the Amharic language, Power of the Trinity. As emperor, he became the head of the Orthodox Church, and by tradition had the religious right to rule.
Before 1974, just the state and the religion, it was linked. Who coronated King Haile Selassie? By the church. That's why I said it. The churches, because the churches, it was belonging to for the king. He's more dominant. You cannot separate the churches and the kings. And also they have a power. Even also 1/3 of the land, it was belonging to for the churches.
Of course, for us, you know, we think he's like God, you know, and he himself did not give us that coin, by the way. It's Abhanna, his treasurer, who goes out and hunts coin, and our eyes are with him. You know, a very short fellow, walking, and you know, that's it. You know, you can imagine at that age, we thought God was on earth.
While he was promoting an agenda based on logic and progressive ideas, legend was a powerful tool of the church. It claims a biblical relationship between its monarch and the famous Jewish leader and legendary wise man, King Solomon. The Ethiopian royal line, so Haile Selassie himself, is said to descend directly from the Queen of Sheba.
I, for one, it's very difficult to justify that Haile Selassie was a direct descendant of Haile Selassie and Queen Sheba and King Solomon. But we simply took it for granted, for we love and respect Emperor Haile Selassie.
It was before Christ, 955 BC. And while she was traveled to Israel, and she was a beautiful woman, and she was asleep with him. While she came to Ethiopia, she was pregnant and born Melik first after 9 months and 5 days.
While Haile Selassie disavowed the legend to educated friends and foreigners, it was part of the powerful hold he had over the common people. The emperor's religious authority would seem to make it easy to unify the nation. But he decided to use his personal touch to make people believe in his love for his country and its people.
He was everywhere in Ethiopia. He was with car. Sometimes with helicopter, for example, 1965. He was with Queen Elizabeth in Gondar, Eritrea. Even they camping in Gondar city, we're almost 40 kilometers far from Gondar, and we were camping.
ለምሳሌ በአስመራ፣ በድሬዳዋ፣ በጅማ፣ በጎንደር ውጭ ሀገር አልሄዱ እንጂ ኢትዮጵያ አንድም ቦታ አይቀረኝ።
በጣም ተወዳጅ መሪ ነበሩ። በአውሮፓ ቋንቋ ፖፑላር እንደሚባለው በጣም ተወዳጅ መሪ ነበሩ። ህዝቡ ታሪካቸውን ያምናል፣ አሰራራቸውን ያምናል፣ መሪነታቸውን በትልቅ ደስታ ተቀብሏል እና አሁን ድረስ ስማቸው የገነነ ነው። በያለበት ብንሄድ ብንጠይቅ ብናይ በዛን ዘመን የነበረና የሚያውቃቸው ይወዳቸዋል።
His accessibility also showed he had an open mind, something that helped him learn from his people and change with the times.
The other encounter was when I was in civil aviation school. Very funny. I had a girlfriend, and in those days, you know, if you have a girlfriend, it has to be very, very secretive. So I was walking her home, and we made sure that we will not encounter her brother. So we took a small alley, and so we were walking, taking our time, chatting, no car. And all of a sudden, we heard a small knock on the horn. We turned around. It was Emperor. We saw the flag. I pulled her out, and we bowed. I will never forget it. He looked at me laughing, and he said, "I saw you." These are my encounters, actually.
እዛ ሁለት ባዞች ተቋቁሮቹ ቻይና ላይ ያው ህዝብ እንደሚጠራቸው ኃይለ ሥላሴ ናቸው። በእኔ በግሌ ደግሞ ጌቴ ነው የምለው እንጂ የቅርብ አገልጋይ እንደሆነ ጌቴ ልል እችላለሁ። የግሌ ነኝ።
While he spent a lot of time cultivating popularity with his Ethiopian subjects, he also courted international favor.
He was a famous diplomat, and a lot of countries has a very good relation with him. African countries, Europe, or also America.
He was everywhere, almost 2,600 something, 2,600 times. He was visiting the 14 province during his time. At that time it was 14 province. Even he was visiting 167 countries in the world.
Occasionally, there was criticism.
Well, his detractors would say he's going there to have fun. But I am sure it's for diplomatic purposes that he went. He would go to America, meet Kennedy or Eisenhower. I think he had met them both. I don't think he would just jibe and come back. He would come with programs of aid and projects of one sort or another.
The emperor learned about modern ideas and technology, bringing home worldly knowledge and friendships.
ሀገር የሚሄዱት ጃንሆይ አንዱም ለሀገሪቱ ወዳጅ ለማፍራት በኢንተርናሽናል ጉዳይ ላይ ተባብሮ ለመስራት ሲሆን ሁለተኛው ደግሞ ኢትዮጵያን በይበልጥ ለማስተዋወቅ ነው።
Haile Selassie anticipated globalization, even on the modest scale of the 1930s. In 1923, he signed Ethiopia up to be the first African country to join the League of Nations, the forefather of the United Nations.
I decided to come myself to defend the cause of my people before the Council of the League of Nations. I hope that the council will be good enough to excuse me from reading the whole of my declaration.
He saw his country being pulled between the development of an industry and its place in its own still wild continent of Africa.
He would send young Ethiopians, very talented young intelligentsia, off to the capitals of Europe to get an education, because he recognized that the country had to modernize.
His initial choice appeared to be to lean toward Europe. There he mined ideas that would help build ministries, schools, and institutions that were aimed at taking Ethiopia from a primitive feudal state to a modern nation.
ቀዳማዊ ሥላሴ አመራራቸው አስተዳደራቸው የተመሰረተው ኢትዮጵያን በዘመናዊ ስልጣኔ እንድትጠቀም ለማድረግና በአዲስ መልክ ለመምራት ነው።
In 1931, he became the first absolute ruler to voluntarily write a constitution, which established a judicial system while still keeping most of the power of government in the emperor's hands.
Until 1974, he shows different kinds of developments in the country. We couldn't deny these kinds of changes. The first constitution written in his monarchy time. The second constitution also improved by his power time. He tried to bring Ethiopia to civilization, to civilize the society, but how far he tried to bring this country, it has its own limitation.
And Selassie was highly interested to have many modern scholars in Ethiopia to change, to bring fundamental change in terms of civilization and development as well.
His early efforts to modernize his country through education had only 6 years to progress before tragedy struck. In 1936, Italy decided once again to be the first European colonizers of Ethiopia.
The entire world was fascinated by this war. It was on the New York Times, it was in the London Times. 20,000 black Americans were marching in Harlem over this war. There are battleships in the Mediterranean about to go to war with Italy over this war, and it was a precursor to the Second World War. It had a huge impact on world events.
The emperor tried to use his connections to head off the Italian attack. He delivered an impassioned speech to the League of Nations, pleading for the world's interference.
The jeers of fascists in the gallery did not stop him. I am here to claim justice, he said. What reply shall I take back to my people? So, said the emperor, it is us today, it will be you tomorrow.
ቀዳማዊ ሥላሴ በዚያ ቦታ ሄደው ራሳቸው የኢትዮጵያ ሕዝብ ከሕግ ውጪ በጥጋበኛ ዲክታተር ምን ያህል ግፍ እንደተፈጸመበት በሚገባ አስረድተዋል። አንድ ንጉሠ ነገሥት ወይም አንድ መሪ በዚያን ዘመን ሄዶ በሊግ ኦፍ ኔሽን ፎረም ላይ ወይም ሸንጎ ላይ አቤቱታ ያቀረበ ከሳቸው በፊት የለም።
Our emperor also made a very remarkable and prophetic speech. He said to them, "It is we today and you tomorrow." After which all the Europeans had fallen under the strongest and brutal heel of Hitler. So it was a kind of prophecy that had already taken place.
His eloquence, moral authority, and logic fell on deaf ears. Despite the League's refusal to intervene, he continued to hope that the strength of his people and the righteousness of their position would defeat the Italians.
It is good that you are here to record this picture of me in my palace garden at Addis Ababa. People who see this throughout the world will realize that even in the 20th century with faith, courage, and a just cause, David will still beat Goliath.
The Italians hit Harar, his youthful stronghold.
Mussolini's planes bombed this city. They wiped out the oldest mosque in Africa, and few people know about it, but there was no military installations here. They just decided, let's scare the living daylights out of the Hararis. And Emperor Haile Selassie, of course, he had a special connection to Harar, and he was very hurt, but he was very emotionally moved by the plight of the people here.
Eventually, the Italians took the capital, burning his palace and shocking Ethiopians with their targets.
They killed more than 300 priests and monks.
It retarded the country. The Italians under Mussolini massacred an entire generation that could have led this country into the 20th and 21st century.
Haile Selassie went into exile in Bath, England in 1936.
He nearly died there practically of pneumonia and sickness because it was so cold and used to the climate. He came back here, and I believe it affected his character deeply that he was never going to give up control and never going to divest control to other people.
For 5 long years, the emperor suffered in tough conditions, in damp cold weather until 1941. Once the Italians were chased out by Ethiopian freedom fighters operating from the countryside, he was welcomed home to reclaim his throne and once again try to unite and modernize Ethiopia.
We had the most difficult time with him when the Italian invasion, for example. Ethiopia has never been invaded by any enemy. It's been always a free land, the freedom fighter, and its people defended their country. 5 years was in his time. And he was lucky enough to actually regain the freedom and helped many of the African nations to get their freedom too. And so he was really a very special, God-gifted person.
But his time away from home had given him some valuable perspective, and he would return with a plan on how to build a new Ethiopia and how to try and empower Africa so it could look after its own. The pillars he would build his modern Ethiopia on would be people, educators, cultural heroes, diplomats, engineers and mechanics, and even pilots. To try and connect Africans, he would build an airline and use his wisdom, charm, and diplomatic experience to move Africa forward toward an era of independence and unity.
She